Hey there, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. There's some new analysis out that is pretty interesting that looks at how much each state might expect to get from the BEAD program as far as their allocation of the $42.45 billion. Since the new broadband map has come out, I'll be right back. We'll take a look at that. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So I want to take a look at this post here. This is on Mike's newsletter. This is from Mike Conlow, and he did some pretty interesting deep dives into the numbers as far as BEAD goes. He's looked at this in the past from the previous map and data, and he updated that when the new map came out. So basically what he's got access to, we're looking at, are the broadband serviceable locations throughout the United States. And that is from the broadband fabric that the FCC contracted CostQuest to make. CostQuest went out and determined where each broadband serviceable location is in a country and in the U.S. territories as best they could, based on all kinds of records, tax records, maps, lots of data, looking at satellite imagery and rooftops and trying to determine which roof in a particular area is where broadband belongs. It's obviously easier in more urban and suburban areas where you've got neighborhoods. It might be a little difficult sometimes to get the records for multi-dwelling units, but if you've got a neighborhood with single-family homes, it's pretty easy to just put a dot on a home and say, okay, this place should have broadband. A little harder maybe in rural areas where you've got a farm and you've got multiple buildings, and where's the farmhouse, and does this building also, maybe it's a building that does need broadband, even though it's not the farmhouse. Then you've got a cow shed that doesn't need broadband. So some of that's they've had to work through a lot of that. So we're on the second iteration of that fabric. And the broadband operators in the country have uploaded their second round of database entries into the broadband data collection system that determines where they can provide service. Not necessarily that they definitely are, but they can. With the standard installation, like less than 2 weeks, somebody can call up and say, hey, I need broadband. So now we have this data set in the first production version of the FCC broadband map. The first map that came out back last November, they were calling pre-production draft because they knew they knew there was a lot of issues with it. It's pretty good compared to what we used to have. We just had in the past by census block. The census block was covered, and if one house had broadband, it was covered. So it's much better than it was, and it's gotten even better this last iteration, but I'm sure there's still issues. But the question is, how far off is it? The NTIA says that based on the data now, they feel like any differences are minimal and would not impact the actual percentages that states will get. So that remains to be seen. But now we've got this data in this latest FCC national broadband map, and like I say, Mike has done a deep dive into this and tried to determine how much each state could expect. So I was going to look through this post a little bit, comment on it, look at his numbers. So it says overall here, as of December 31, 2022, there are 114,538,393,000 broadband serviceable locations in the country, including territories. Now, there may be some slight differences in his numbers here because he has another post that I'll show in a minute where he realized he left one piece of information out, but minor changes apparently. So he says that's a net addition of 1 million BSLs. 7.3% of the BSLs are unserved, which is 8.26 million up 462,066 in the 50 states. And I think that, I think that's actually 8.3 million. So I think he made a note that was fixed, which we'll look at later. 3.19% of the BSLs are underserved, or 3.62 million nationally. So there's some data from him. Then he's got spreadsheets. I'm actually going to open the actual spreadsheet and look at that, but he's got a copy of the spreadsheet here. By the way, I linked to this and to the other article I'm going to show that just had some minor changes in the description of this video. So I won't bother clicking on this image of this. We'll look at the spreadsheet here in a minute. There's a link to the spreadsheet here. Michigan, for example, lost 83,568 unserved locations, a 21% decline, which leads to $412 million lower allocation. That's significant. So what he's saying is the first time he looked at the data and what the data was showing was that Michigan had a certain number of unserved locations, and they've lost over 83,000 of those. So now that means $412 million that kind of has been reduced as to what they thought they would get. So anytime a state loses locations, that means that the percentages change. So basically the way this is going to work is the NTIA is looking at all unserved locations throughout the United States and territories. And then based on a state's number of unserved locations, they just do a simple formula and saying, what's your percentage? And that's how much money they get. So as a state loses locations, they're going to lose funds. And if a state gains locations, they're gaining funds. So, and if it was just that the number of locations is less, then it's going to mean that state is going to get lesser allocation, and the other states are going to kind of split that. So he says here, North Dakota, Indiana, Florida, Georgia, and South Dakota also have double-digit losses. Now, one thing that it could be, like I live in Georgia, and I know one thing that could be causing a loss of locations there is that our state's been very aggressive at using ARPA funds, for example, to deploy broadband. So they got, I forget the numbers, hundreds of millions of dollars collectively through ARPA, through the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, and then also the Capital Projects Fund. So they've been taking those dollars, any dollars that they've taken prior that were not maybe noted in the first fabric as committed funds, would likely have been noted as committed funds in the second fabric, and that certainly they won't be able to deploy broadband there if they're going to be getting ARPA funds and be putting that money to work there. So very possible that Georgia, for example, lost locations because since the first fabric came out, they had committed federal funds from the ARPA program, and therefore those do not count as unserved anymore because they will be served using that money. So that's a possibility of what's going on in a state like Georgia. I don't know about these others. It could be something similar. In some states, the addition of unserved locations is dramatic. Alaska's unserved locations grew 84% to 88,181, increasing their allocation by 185 million. And that's not that surprising because, again, it depends on how difficult it was for CostQuest to figure out where broadband service locations were. So they have certain records, and you don't have lots of, parts of Alaska, you don't have lots of neighborhoods, where you've got house after house after house. I mean, you got houses and woods and separated by long distances. So I could see where that would be one where they made some corrections. And I'm assuming some of these corrections were made in conjunction with and with help from the states that said, hey, you missed a big block of places over here that should be on this, that are broadband serviceable. Let's see, there were a lot of other states with big increases. Nebraska, 222%. Wow. Iowa, 117%. Oregon, 65%. Kansas, 46%. North Carolina, plus 45%. It says the big news is the projected allocation of the $42.5 billion. NTI plans to release the allocation at the end of June. So it's more than likely that with the release of this data, the allocation levels are now set. And I think that's true. The NTIA has been really pushing back on anybody that's been saying, hey, you need to wait because it needs to be perfect or it's not good enough, even if it doesn't need to be perfect. And what they've said is it's close enough where they don't think there's going to be any significant statistical difference on what states are going to be getting. And you have to look at, there are going to be places on the map where I think in a state where you've got some locations that are not marked as serviceable, so somehow they were missed. And then you've got other locations that are marked as serviceable that really shouldn't be. Again, that cow shed or something like that. Or, a barn, or a garage and a house on the same property that garage doesn't need it. So there may be some of that's going to balance out as well. So again, he's got a kind of a screenshot or an image here of that, which I'll look at here in a moment. I'm actually going to be looking at this one. And let's see, 10% of the overall allocation is based on the number of high-cost locations in each state. To my knowledge, NTIA still hasn't published how they plan to determine how many high-cost locations each state has. I think the states have some input on that. So the states are, I believe, as they're putting their plans together and their proposals, I think that they are supposed to come up with what is a high-cost location. The NTIA would like them to be in a range that makes sense, where it's not so low that you're going to be having a lot of people that should be getting fiber not getting fiber. So I think the states have a lot of input there, because it's going to be very different state to state. It's very different from a place like, let's say, Rhode Island, and a place like Alaska, where you've got lots of high-cost locations. As an estimate, he says he uses numbers he generated in previous analysis that are themselves based on the reserve prices from the FCC's RDOF reverse auction. So he's got some basis that he's going back on that to make that estimate. This allocation could undercount underserved locations in the territories, since the broadband coverage options are few. For example, in the previous page, I had Puerto Rico with 213 unserved out of 1.6 million BSLs. And this version, I get 60,036 unserved out of 1.15 million BSLs. That leads to a minus 628 million swing for Puerto Rico, money that goes to other states. So that's a big loss for Puerto Rico. Down here, I just want to note, he says, if you wish to cite these numbers, please do as estimates from broadband analyst Mike Conlow. So duly noted, and a link to the Substack post duly linked here in the description of this video. And again, he came out a few days later, says mostly minor correction of unserved locations in allocation estimates. Overall, this correction brings down the number of unserved locations from this is what it was, from 8.6 million he had before to 8.3 million unserved locations, which match the top level number the FCC put out. In my view, it's not a material change in the story of these new maps or the problem in Michigan, which we noted how much money they had lost. And what that was, he says the FCC published LBR wireless files for 41 states that's licensed by Rural Wireless. An example is general authorized access spectrum that can be used for the CBRS band. And what that is, so CBRS, that is the mid-band spectrum that the FCC came out, and they came up with a dynamic spectrum sharing scheme. And in that scheme, there are general authorized access licenses that he mentions here that can use the entire 150 megahertz of that spectrum. There are priority access licenses that can use the 100 megahertz below, and then you've got 50 megahertz that are for incumbent users, which would be the Navy and folks like that. So, and there's dynamic spectrum sharing that takes place here. So these folks that are using these GAA licenses, they can't just go and set it up. They actually have to register with companies that will then handle this dynamic spectrum sharing. So maybe what the FCC is saying is, even though this is general authorized access and this is unlicensed spectrum, maybe they're treating it like it's licensed spectrum, because it is CBRS spectrum. It's mid-band spectrum. That means it's 5G fixed wireless, should be able to deliver well over 100 megabits per second. So I think what he's seeing here is that those have been added as locations. So in some cases, locations that were maybe unserved before are now underserved, and maybe some locations that were underserved are now served. He says, in general, the differences are small, as it only impacts locations where the LBR coverage filing moves a location from unserved to underserved or served. But another way, if there's any other unserved or served offering from an ISP, it doesn't matter what the LBR offerings are. But there are a few states where it made a bigger difference. In Missouri, more than 60,000 locations become underserved or served. In Illinois, over 40,000 locations are no longer unserved. Texas and Wisconsin are honorable mentions. And he's got some charts here that show, I think, how things changed there. So again, there's a link to this as well. And then his spreadsheet, there's a link to his spreadsheet in both of these posts that you'll probably want to check out. I'm going to make this a little bigger for us here. So let me see. That should go away, I think. Yeah. So here you've got states sorted by state. There's no way to sort this because it's just set up where you can't do that. But it's by state this way. So you can look here, and here he's got some colors, and I believe what he's looking at here is the darker the kind of red shade, the bigger the loss. The darker the green shade, the bigger the gain, is what I'm understanding here. So you're looking at just on the side here, you can see the ones like here's minus 317 million for, who is that? Florida, right? And then you've got for here up 238 million for Iowa, and then you've got here 412 million down for Michigan. That's the big one he was talking about there, the big loss. Right here, you got up 416 million for North Carolina, up 357 for West Virginia. What do we got here? We got down, that's 628. That is Puerto Rico, so that's the number he was talking about there. That's quite a bit different from the first go round. So he's got his original, this is BDC 2022 December. That's the BDC, and this is the allocations here, okay. Then he's got previous release. This was from June, so he's got information there. But this is the one that I was most interested in, was looking at this. And as you look at it, one thing of note, it looks like Texas is still going to be getting the largest allocation here as I go over. Where are my numbers? Here it is. Oh, numbers are here. So for Texas, I think is the largest. So we got 3.4 billion. 3.4, almost $3.5 billion that Texas will be getting. You've got some other big ones. You see a lot of $1 billion kinds of allocations in here. Those are, I guess, the next biggest are all at $1 billion. Then you've got what's not unexpected would be states like Delaware, just barely over the minimum allocation. So each state under BEAD gets a minimum of $100 million. And then if they go above, if their percentage, if they have a percentage of unserved that would give them additional allocation, it depends again on how many unserved they have. And in this case, they've got, let's see, percent of U.S., total U.S., it looks like 0. So I would think they just get 100 million, but it's probably close or something like that. So it's just like $108 million. And then another one was expecting to be low as Rhode Island. Rhode Island, 109 million. So again, it's kind of listed as a 0 here. So 109 million. And you can see that he's got the amount of unserved locations for each of the states. So let's see, what was Texas? Texas, that's the amount per unserved location. Rhode Island, so I'm not sure what those numbers are, but again, very interesting as he dives into this. As I do my calculations, sometimes I don't have a whole lot of time to do it and to get into this detail. So he does a great job on getting into the details and looking at this. And it'll be interesting to see. I expect others to do this. Maybe the Fiber Broadband Association will take numbers and see what they think. I think it was the ACA and NTIA together, I believe it was, that had put together some estimates, and they look at other kinds of information as well. So it'll be interesting to see what they come up with and how all of this stuff kind of tracks. But we'll all know, I guess, the final numbers on June 30th or before that, whenever the NTIA comes out with this. So that is the next thing that we're looking for, is the NTI to come out with their numbers. And once they do, then we'll know exactly what each state will get. And don't forget that even if a state looks at they're still probably figuring everything out. And if they're looking at their map and they're realizing, you know what, there are locations here that actually are unserved, that the FCC map shows are served, they can make a case. They can say, we're going to go ahead and deploy broadband here, and here's why. They can make a case to the NTIA and say, this information was wrong. So they don't need to stick to that. It won't change the amount of money that they're going to get from the NTIA. But if there are locations that are unserved, that are not unserved on the map, they can certainly go ahead and build in that area. I think they do have to probably get back to the NTIA and let them know why they're deviating from what's in the FCC map. They probably have to do that, if I can recall. And again, there could be areas, as they're looking at those areas, they could be areas where they're looking and saying, well, this says this says these locations are unserved, but they're actually served. So maybe an internet service provider missed some spots where they actually are providing service, and that is being figured out, and those locations, even though they're showing unserved, will not be built to. So again, there will be some give and take there. So the states will have a lot of leeway on how they use the money. They'll have a lot of leeway on which areas are considered high cost, extremely high cost, and what they can do as far as technology goes there. Let's see, they'll have leeway on technology to use. Kind of the same thing. So they may find areas that it's like, we just can't do fiber here. It's just too costly. It's going to break the budget. So they may decide to do other types of technologies there. And they could even do a technology that's not considered reliable broadband service. That would be, they could deviate from it being a wired service like cable or fiber or DSL. There's not going to be much DSL there. Or licensed fixed wireless. They could do completely unlicensed fixed wireless. It sounds like maybe CBRS unlicensed general access licenses or general access would be okay. And who knows, maybe even satellite if they've got one customer on top of a mountain. And the best thing you can do is provide them some kind of way to get satellite more cheaply. I don't know. We'll have to see how those are handled. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for Mike Conlow putting that all together. It was very interesting. Look forward to seeing maybe numbers from other organizations, and then also just where it all falls out on June 30th. Appreciate you joining me today. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button and click the bell to be notified when you're live. Give me a like on the video if you liked it. I'd appreciate it. Thanks a lot, and I will see you next time for Broadband Deployment News. Take care.